On Tuesday, the Department of Health and Human Services declared an emergency. They froze $10 billion in funding for 5 specific states. The justification? Widespread fraud. The administration claimed that without this immediate freeze, taxpayer money would vanish into criminal networks. But on Friday afternoon, inside a federal courtroom in New York, a simple question was asked. Where is the evidence? When pressed by U.S. District Judge Aaron Subramanian, the government's lawyers could not produce a single new audit, a single fresh indictment, or a single piece of concrete evidence linking this $10 billion freeze to immediate, ongoing crimes in 4 of the 5 states. They had a theory, they had a suspicion, they had a YouTube video about daycares in Minnesota, but they did not have the proof required to override the United States Congress. So why did they do it? Why trigger a constitutional crisis over evidence they knew they didn't have? Because the goal wasn't to win in court today. The goal was to break the system tomorrow. If you watched the news this week, you saw 2 movies. On screen, you saw the cruelty narrative. Outlets like The Guardian and CBS focused entirely on the victims. They interviewed terrified daycare owners in California and single mothers in New York. They framed this as a moral failing, a vindictive president attacking the most vulnerable citizens because they live in blue states. The keywords were retribution, chaos, and suffering. On the other screen, you saw the accountability narrative. Conservative outlets focused exclusively on Minnesota. They looped a viral video from a YouTuber exposing alleged fraud in Somali-run daycare centers. They quoted HHS officials calling Democratic governors complicit in theft. +1. Their keywords were waste, fraud, and justice. Both narratives are designed to make you emotional. Neither explains what actually happened. The media missed the mechanism. This wasn't just a funding cut, it was an administrative dragnet. By focusing on the morality of the freeze, the press ignored the legality of the demand. HHS didn't just say, stop the fraud. They told 5 states, California, New York, Illinois, Minnesota, and Colorado, to hand over the personal data, including social security numbers, of everyone receiving these benefits. And they gave them 14 days to do it. The media treated this as a fight over money. It isn't. It is a fight over the executive branch's power to impound funds that Congress has already legally appropriated, using suspicion as a loophole. Mainstream outlets ignored this legal precedent because administrative procedure doesn't get clicks. Starving children does. But if the executive branch can unilaterally freeze congressional spending based on a suspicion of fraud, the separation of powers no longer exists. Let's strip away the outrage and look at the documents. Here is what we know based on court filings and official statements released between January 6th and January 10th. Fact number 1. The scale. The Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, froze access to 3 specific grant programs: the Child Care and Development Fund, CCDF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF, and the Social Services Block Grant. The total value is approximately $10 billion. This money was not proposed. It was already appropriated by Congress for the current fiscal year. Fact number 2, the justification. In a statement, HHS spokesperson Andrew Nixon said the following: "For too long, Democrat-led states and governors have been complicit in allowing massive amounts of fraud to occur under their watch." The administration cited serious concerns that funds were being diverted to non-citizens. However, in the court hearing Friday, the government's primary evidence of widespread fraud was largely centered on Minnesota. In Minnesota, there is an ongoing documented scandal involving fraud in daycare centers, some linked to the Somali community. The administration used this specific case in one state to justify a blanket freeze on 5 states. Fact number 3, the demand. Letters sent to these states by the Administration for Children and Families, a division of HHS, demanded a strong justification for the use of funds and, crucially, a massive data transfer of recipient information by January 20th. State officials argued in court that compiling this data, millions of records, within 2 weeks was logistically impossible. Fact number 4, the ruling. On Friday, January 9th, U.S. District Judge Arun Subramanian issued a temporary restraining order. Temporary restraining order, Jan 9, 2026. Judge Subramanian did not rule on whether there is fraud. He did not rule on whether the president hates New York. He ruled that the states had met the legal threshold to protect the status quo. He blocked the freeze for 14 days. Why? Because under the Administrative Procedure Act, the government cannot act arbitrarily and capriciously. The judge essentially said, you cannot cut off $10 billion today based on evidence you promised to find tomorrow. What we don't know. We do not know if the administration has classified intelligence regarding fraud rings that they simply haven't revealed in open court yet. And we do not know if the other 45 states are next. The reaction to this ruling exposes the hypocrisy on both sides of the aisle. Let's start with the Democrats. New York Governor Kathy Hochul called the freeze vindictive. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker called it cruel. But watch the pivot. For years, these same leaders have argued that the executive branch needs more power to act quickly in emergencies, whether for climate change or public health. Now that the emergency is being defined by a conservative administration to cut spending, suddenly they are strict constitutionalists, demanding adherence to congressional appropriation limits. They are right on the law, but their sudden love for fiscal procedure is convenient. Now, look at the Republicans. The GOP platform is built on states' rights. The idea that Washington, D.C. should not dictate how a state manages its internal affairs. Yet here we have a federal agency, HHS, overriding the sovereignty of 5 state governments, demanding their internal data and freezing their bank accounts. If a Democratic president froze funding to Texas or Florida because he suspected their gun laws were being mismanaged, these same conservative voices would be screaming about tyranny. But because the target is welfare fraud in blue states, the principles of federalism have vanished. The administration's reaction to the judge's ruling was telling. They didn't scramble to provide the missing evidence. They doubled down on the rhetoric. HHS spokesperson Andrew Nixon didn't say, "We will prove our case." He said the states were complicit. This suggests they aren't trying to win a legal argument. They are trying to win a public relations war. They want you to believe that the judge is the one protecting the fraudsters. So, what happens next? The temporary restraining order expires in 14 days. The media thinks this is a win for the states. They are wrong. Based on the incentives of this administration and the patterns we've seen so far, here is my prediction for the next week. The administration will not comply with the spirit of the judge's order. They will likely file an emergency appeal to the Second Circuit or the Supreme Court within the next 72 hours. But more importantly, expect the narrative to shift from fraud to national security. Why? Because fraud is a domestic crime that requires tedious evidence in lower courts. National security and border integrity give the president sweeping emergency powers that are much harder for a judge to block. The initial HHS statements already hinted at this. They mentioned concerns about benefits going to non-citizens. Watch for the administration to rebrand this freeze. They will stop talking about mismanagement and start talking about funding illegal immigration. By doing this, they force the courts to decide not just on accounting errors, but on the president's authority to protect the border. They want this fight to go to the Supreme Court. They want a ruling that says the executive branch can impound funds if they suspect those funds are aiding undocumented immigrants. This $10 billion isn't the point. Establishing that precedent is the point. The mainstream media is telling you this is over because a judge signed a piece of paper. The partisan media is telling you to be angry. But nobody is telling you to watch the legal precedent being set right now. They don't want this information getting out. They prefer you emotional and distracted. If you want to help us fight the algorithm and spread the truth, please give us a like.